Hello everybody, welcome back to the channel. My name is Brad, this is Q Branch Woodworks, and today we're going to talk about quitting. More specifically, why we quit, and how we can unquit. As a matter of fact, I quit this exact bowl on 2 separate occasions. In total, it took me almost 4 months to make, and I would love to say that this quitting and restarting is 100% triumphant. The fact is, I'm not completely satisfied with the outcome. That said, I am extremely proud of myself for getting back on the horse and finishing this piece. I didn't let this one die in the corner of my workshop like so many others, and even though it's not going to make it to the Smithsonian, I still think there are some valuable lessons to learn. Specifically today, I'd like to talk about quitting, and I'd also like to talk about when it's okay to quit, and how to recognize the difference. Today's turn starts with a bowl blank from Scott Alexander. This is some kind of cherry from the Midwest. It's absolutely beautiful, nice chatoyance on the inside, relatively dense, and it curls beautifully when it's cut. All I'm doing to start things off is resizing the tenon to make sure that it can fit my medium-sized chuck. Once I have that sorted out, it's just a simple matter of flipping it over, gripping it tight in the chuck jaws, and getting this thing a little bit more symmetrical. Here, I'm using the 3/8 bowl gouge just to get this rim nice and flat. I want to make sure that it's not wobbling too much. Now at this point in the turn, I don't actually know what I'm going to do to the outside, but I do know that it's going to be on the outside, so what I'm doing here is I'm putting a recess on the inside of the bowl so that I can flip this thing back around and grip it securely. Now, because I don't have to worry about torn grain because I'm going to return the inside of this bowl eventually anyway, I'm literally just laying a skew chisel on its side to make this recess. From here, all I'm trying to do is get the outside concentric again. I'll be taking some nice, easy cuts just to make sure that I get rid of any wobble. Reminder that if you didn't start the day with a sharp gouge, this is a great time to go ahead and hit that grinding wheel. It makes life a lot easier on the outside. Again, since I know I'm going to be carving later, I'm just doing some rough sanding on the outside using my power sander. That's just what I call this 90-degree drill. From here, I swap out my tool rest and I insert my Trent Bosch carving stand. Now, I know you've seen this in other videos from me before, but I think this thing is an absolutely awesome piece of kit. It has a firm grip, lots of mobility, and it means that I don't actually need a second bench. I can just kind of use my lathe as a carving station. This has been the biggest change in my turning in the last year, is that I no longer see the outside of the bowl as a finished product. I see it as a blank canvas. So here I'm just touching the bowl kind of weirdly, trying to figure out what I'm trying to do. Once you draw that first line, things sort of flow easily from there. Every line is related to another line that you put on the bowl. Since I'm pretty sure that I'm going to be using my rotary chisel, as I usually do on these, I like to make sure that the lines converge at interesting angles because it gives me a nice mix of sort of rounded shapes and kind of pointy shapes. It really mixes up the end texture on the outside of the bowl. Now that I have the general outline pretty well figured out, it's just a matter of carving through with the rotary chisel. Since I know I'm going to be recarving everything, I'm not actually too worried about scorching in this one, so you'll see me leaving some black marks behind on the piece. So anyway, why did I quit on this piece? Well, a couple of things happened in my personal life. Number one, I got promoted at my day job, which unfortunately means that I'm going to have to do a bit more of it now and again. Now, I like my day job, but I would strongly prefer to be a professional woodturner. That said, there are bills to pay, so I have to do what I have to do. The second thing that happened is that my wife and I got some pretty exciting news.
In the moment,
First glamour shot.
That's wild.
So all of this was happening at the same time, and I was experiencing what I like to call panic joy. As comedian Maria Bamford once put it, it's like being paralyzed by hope. Really, I think I just had too much on my mind to pursue things creatively for a while. I was really just trying to keep my head above water with all the news I was getting. Projects like this also require a fair amount of focus and a lot of dedicated time in the shop. The only time that I can usually get is between about 5 and 7 a.m. before my kids wake up. And for a few weeks there, I just elected to sleep instead. It's not that I wasn't excited about the piece, I definitely was. It's more that it just wasn't going to be my first priority for a while. It wasn't the first thing I thought about when I woke up every morning. And you know what? That's okay. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the science of quitting. So looking at an unfinished project can sometimes trigger feelings of overwhelm or even anxiety. Our brain, in its infinite wisdom, tries to protect us by steering us towards easier, more instantly gratifying activities. The "I'll do it later" mantra is a classic defense mechanism. My later for this bowl just happened to stretch across a couple of months. But here's the interesting thing. Even though I'd quit, this bowl never really left my mind. It was always there, lurking in the corner of the workshop and the corner of my brain. There's a fascinating psychological phenomenon called the Zeigarnik effect. It's our brain's tendency to remember uncompleted tasks better than completed ones. It's like an internal to-do list that keeps pinging you. So while one part of my brain was avoiding the work, another part was constantly nudging me. Hey, what about that bowl? It's a mental itch that needs scratching. Psychologists also talk about something called activation energy. Think of it like the initial push that you need to get a boulder rolling. It's like resting inertia. When a project is new, your enthusiasm often lowers that activation energy. But when you step away or hit a snag, that energy requirement can feel impossibly high. My brain, looking at this half-carved section, basically said, nope, too much effort, let's go watch White Lotus instead. So, how to break out of this kind of slump? First, I had to consciously lower that activation energy. Instead of thinking, I need to finish this entire bowl, I told myself, just spend 15 minutes on that one carving detail. Breaking it down into tiny, manageable steps makes the initial hurdle feel almost non-existent. This is classic advice, but it works because it tricks your brain into starting. And once you're started, you're off to the races. Trick number 2 is the power of small wins. Once I did that first small bit, something clicked. That little bit of progress, however minor, released a small hit of dopamine. It's the small wins principle. Each tiny completion fuels the next, creating a positive feedback loop. Suddenly, the project felt less like a mountain and more like a series of small, climbable hills. Number 3 was reframing and self-compassion. I had to stop beating myself up for abandoning the piece. I had a lot going on. It's easy to fall into the trap of thinking, I'm a quitter. But reframing it as, I took a necessary and well-deserved break, or I needed to approach this with fresh energy, is much more productive. Giving yourself that grace can be incredibly powerful for reigniting motivation. If you have a project that's gathering dust and taunting you from the corner, know that you're not alone, and it's not a personal failing. Understanding the science of why you stopped and using that same science to help you start again is the easiest way forward. Break it down, be kind to yourself, chase those small wins, and scratch that Zeigarnik itch. You might be surprised what you can accomplish. Anyhow, I've now switched over to the conical burrs in my rotary tool, and I'm just sort of backing off those valleys that I made with the rotary chisel. Basically just trying to widen that divide a little bit and give these sections kind of a cushion shape. This also has the added benefit of removing all the scorch marks that the rotary chisel left behind. Now this part of the build is still kind of fun. It's engaging. Each of these shapes is different, so it doesn't really get monotonous. In the back of my mind, though, I'm thinking, how much do I really want to sand this piece when I'm done? The short answer, not a lot. So I tried some experiments to see what I could do with the surfaces in between each of these cushions. Here I am trying a brass wheel to see if I can just sort of take the texture down on the inside a little bit. And here I am trying a nylon brush to, unfortunately, the same poor effect. It's kind of a shame. I actually really thought this one was going to work. Anyhow, long story short, I wound up back at hand sanding just trying to get rid of some of this texture. I didn't know what I was going to do in between each of these sections yet, and while I was thinking about it, I thought, might as well just kill some time to make sure that this is all nice and smooth, and whatever I decide has a good surface to go on. So So right around here I decided what I actually wanted the texture on the outside of this piece to be, and it's going to be dimpled. I have a ton of these rotary burrs laying around, and I thought that it might be fun to do sort of the inverse of that crazy bowl that I did a while back where I did all of the cup burrs, and I thought maybe just invert the shape a little bit. Try to use that sort of negative space in the lines in between them to frame up kind of a honeycomb pattern. I find that patterns like this tend to be sort of stream of consciousness. I have a loose idea of what I want it to look like, but really it's just kind of getting stuck in and doing the work that reveals the piece in the end. So while I was feeling bad about having quit this piece twice, I actually found this pretty interesting story that I wanted to share with you all. It's a story of leaving and coming back, and it's not entirely triumphant, but I still think that there's kind of a nice symmetry, a nice closed loop to it, so here we go. It's about a project that was dramatically abandoned, only to be completed years later to become one of the world's most iconic structures. It's the tale of Jorn Utzon, a brilliant architect, and his grand yet troubled design. So back in the late 1950s, a major international competition was launched to design a significant new cultural building in a famous harbor city. A relatively unknown Danish architect named Jorn Utzon submitted a radical, highly conceptual design. It was just a few sketches that looked like sails or shells, which kind of hinted at his unique vision. The judges for the competition were impressed, and Utzon's design won. Now, this was a dream project. I mean, it was going to be huge. It was an architectural marvel waiting to happen. But the construction was incredibly complex. His design involved curved surfaces that were challenging to build because they were unlike anything that had been built before. The project had budget blowouts, political changes, and constant disagreements with the authorities and engineers. Utzon, a brilliant visionary, was also a difficult collaborator, as artists can be from time to time, and he often clashed with others over his uncompromising artistic vision. The pressure mounted, and the project became a political football. And by 1966, after years of intense conflict and rising costs, Utzon essentially quit, or was forced out depending on who you ask. He left the country, vowing never to return, and his revolutionary building was left unfinished. A massive, half-built concrete puzzle on the harbor. The project was essentially abandoned by its creator. For years, other architects completed the interior, making significant changes to Utzon's original designs for some of the performance spaces. The building finally opened in 1973 and immediately became a global landmark, but Utzon himself received little credit and remained estranged from his creation. But here's where the story takes a much happier turn. Decades later, in the late 1990s, with the building approaching its 30th anniversary, the managing trust recognized the injustice done to Utzon and wanted to bring him back into the fold to guide future modifications to his design. So in 1999, he was now an elderly man, but he was officially re-engaged by the trust. Now, due to his age and health, he couldn't travel, but he worked with his son, Jan, and a team of architects to create a set of design principles for the building's future. He even got to redesign one of the main reception halls, which was completed posthumously. The effect of this return was immense. It was a beautiful act of reconciliation, bringing the creator back to his creation. Utzon received the Pritzker Architecture Prize in 2003, basically the Nobel Prize for Architecture, with a citation explicitly mentioning his iconic structure and the injustice that he had faced. He unfortunately died in 2008, but he was finally at peace with his most famous work, knowing his original vision would be honored, and that he was recognized as the sole genius behind its form. That building, a symbol of its nation, stands majestically on the harbor, its soaring white sails recognized instantly around the globe. I'm talking, of course, about the Sydney Opera House. Utzon's story reminds us that sometimes a project needs a long period of separation and renewed effort to truly complete its journey to greatness, even if the completion is just reconciliation years down the line. Now, I know that story has a tinge of sadness to it, but I think that's how a lot of creation is. It's never exactly as we envision it, or at least not the way I do it. The finished pieces represent a compromise between my vision and reality. It also represents a bridge between the vision that I have and the skills that I actually bring to the table, which, unfortunately, are still often lacking. That said, I think it's beautiful that the man was able to circle back around to something that had caused him so much acrimony, something that was his crowning achievement, but he had eventually been basically kicked out of, and returned to reconcile it and to steer it in the direction that he wanted in his later years. I know that tale has absolutely nothing whatsoever to do with wood turning, but I thought it was too good not to share, so thank you for indulging me. Now, it's been so long since I started this piece that I can't actually remember where the inspiration for this particular texture came from. I can, however, tell you that it was rooted in a deep desire not to have to sand in between each of these little cushions again. My best guess is that I figured that if I added some kind of texture, that sanding would obviously become unnecessary. And since I had already used the round burrs to give the texture to the top, I figured maybe something a little bit more structured and linear could work in between. Or maybe I just upgraded my pyrography unit and this is what I wanted to do with it first. We may never know in the end, but this is ultimately the pattern that I settled on. And the whole idea here is to make sure that these lines that I'm burning in between are running roughly perpendicular to the cushions. Now you can probably tell that I'm getting this tip absolutely ripping hot. That means that it is creating a lot of smoke, and this can present an issue for a couple of reasons. Number one, if you're in a commercial shop, this can be rough for setting off things like smoke detectors and smoke alarms. Number two, if you're in a home shop, your significant other might not be super thrilled about all the smoke that you're creating in the garage, even if it doesn't smell like the smoke you created in the garage as a teenager. Third, lung health is super important. It's why we should all be wearing respiration of some kind. That said, I still think it's worth it to pop open a door and run a fan to make sure that you're not just inhaling the smoke that comes off the piece if you decide to try this at home. Now, I say this as a guy who will occasionally smoke a cigar while playing poker with friends. I still don't think it's a good idea to just inhale all of this wood smoke. Many respirators will catch a fair amount of the smoke. Many of them just aren't rated for it at all, so be sure you know what kind of equipment you're dealing with. And the best respirator is called going outside to do this. Now, I procrastinated a lot on this part of the project, but this is also where I started to get my groove back, saying, I'm just going to do the outside of one of these cushions every single day or every single time that I wind up with some downtime. That breaking things into small chunks is ultimately what kept the project moving forward. And this is how things are shaping up at this stage of the project. I think it's kind of interesting. Maybe not completely balanced, but definitely visually appealing. Alright, now we're back to some regular turning stuff, and have I ever told you about Thomas Jefferson's entire biography? It starts when... I'm just kidding, we're not actually going to do that. I will say it's always a little bit nerve-wracking to put something of this many hours into it back onto the lathe. A lot of people in my comments say, like, why didn't you just finish the bowl and then do the entire outside? And it's because then I can't use it on the carving rest. I have to just hold it in my dumb old hands while I do the rest of it. This feels like an acceptable risk for significantly improved ergonomics as far as the project goes. I will tell you that the only thing going through my mind in this shot is don't funnel it, don't funnel it, don't make a funnel, do not make a funnel, don't make a funnel, don't make a funnel. I took several very, very shallow passes across the bottom to make sure that I did exactly that. It had also been a while since I had turned literally anything, so I was feeling a little bit rusty at this point, but we brought it home safely. Next up, just a little bit of quick sanding for the inside of the piece. Here I'm just doing a quick spot check to make sure that there's no obvious torn grain or any really significant scratch marks. All the same, with the kind of effort that I put into this piece, I'm going to take a second and use Dr. Kirk's Scratch Free on the inside just to give it a nice glossy surface. This stuff is really nice if you haven't heard of it. It's basically an abrasive suspended in some kind of wax. You can get it from Craft Supplies USA. Really handy for getting that extra little bit of shine on the inside or outside of your pieces. Now I need to take off the bottom. I need to remove that tenon. I'd sort of gone back and forth on what I actually wanted to do with the bottom here, but I decided we've come this far, let's just land the plane. You know, simple is best in this case, I think. Now, I sort of tried to take the easy way here using that same exact hole that I had used in the very beginning, and unfortunately, things were just a little bit off. It started to wobble my tailstock a little bit, so I had to back it out and then resurface the bottom so that I could make a new hole with my live center. Unfortunately, it's pretty difficult to cheat physics, so you have to do what you have to do. Here I'm taking cuts back toward the headstock for the most part. This is just making me a little bit nervous. Even though I have tailstock support, I still really don't want to see this thing coming off the lathe. And even though this piece, I think, already has a fair amount going for it, I still think it's nice to leave a little bit of detail on the bottom. Here I'm doing sort of a raised bead, so I turn a bead and then I basically cut away the inside and the outside to make the bead stand a little bit proud of the rest of the surface. kind of fun, looks a little bit like an additive element, and takes literally 3 or 4 cuts. Then, as usual, some sanding and just a little bit more of that Dr. Kirk's scratch free on the bottom, just to make sure that that surface looks like the interior. Now time to pop it on off the lathe and take a look at where we are. Now what I realized here was I had a couple of areas that I hadn't actually done the dimpling on, and they're pretty small, so I'm not sure that I'm going to do the dimpling at all. Instead, what I decided on was using that pyrography to sort of make it flow from the base. Since I have all of these other pyrography sections that are coming out of the base, I thought that this would be the most continuous look. And all I tried to do at this stage was just to sort of loosely align them radially, like make it look like they're all sort of coming out from the center of the bottom of the bowl. This also gives it a little bit of a contrast to the pyrography that runs perpendicular to the cushions, just sort of delineating that like these are 2 separate sections, right? Just a little bit of visual differentiation there. And now it's time to bring the black. And you definitely want to make sure that you squirt some of this onto your shop floor. Just like that. Now, why did I choose black? It's definitely not because I had a bunch of it left over. That's honestly pretty much it. This is the color that I have. I had already burned the other sections, so this kind of felt fitting. And here is what it looks like after coloring. I think it looks pretty cool, kind of sinister, a little bit alien. Looks like maybe you don't want to touch it. Also worth saying that I probably could have safely stopped here. But I still had something that I wanted to try. Now, I had this gold acrylic sort of lying around the shop for a little while, and I thought, well, I've been on this sort of black and gold kick recently. Why not try putting this into action? The good reason why not is because I haven't painted anything smaller than a house on purpose in years. The concept here was that I was going to outline all of the sort of biggest honeycomb with this gold paint, basically just trying to bring some attention to the varied size and the dimples on the outside of the piece. This turned out to be super difficult, trying to manage the paint that's actually on that tiny little brush, manage the thickness of the paint. It seems like temperature played a factor here as well. As it warmed up, it got a little bit looser and started sort of like bleeding into these dimples and stuff. In my mind, it was just sitting on top of each of those little intersections between the dimples, and that's just not what was coming out of the brush. So I slowed my pace. I tried cooling off the paint a little bit just to see if I could get it to stand up a little bit. Unfortunately, it just wasn't really coming together. So this isn't the texture that I imagined, but I do think that it's still an interesting contrast. And since we're already in the deep end, why not attempt a spray finish for the first time? So I'd sort of thought about like varnish or maybe some polyacrylic or something like that, but what I settled on is something that I know better than just about any other finish, which is shellac. I know what it smells like, I know how to deal with it. This is just some bullseye that I'm spraying on top, trying to sort of seal in that color. And I also know that the ink that I'm using is shellac based, so I know for a fact that I can put this finish over the top. And I wasn't sure how the acrylic or any other coat would go on top of it. And so all I'm trying to do here is make sure that every area seems to have gotten some of the shellac. Always highly scientific on this side, huh? So after all of this experimentation and procrastination and trying new things and trying to get my headspace right, what we're left with is this. As always, I just want to say thank you so much for being here and for watching. I love this little community that we're building together, and I really appreciate you staying around to the end of this video. If you're going to be at AAW in St. Paul, please be sure to drop me a line either here or on Instagram so that we can all be sure to meet up. Stay safe out there, and happy turning.